G'day guys, welcome to the first lesson on making your very first code project in Visual Studio C Sharp. We're going to be starting our C Sharp coding just like every programming language. We do our Hello World activity. Okay, once I've done that little basic part about the Hello World, I'm going to add in a few additional features. These are some of the examples of the more common stuff that you're going to have in your project. So this is the project where I opened up and did the demo on it last time. I forgot to mention about how to change between the themes. So right now you can see I've got the white theme turned on. Well, up in the top menu, you can see the word that you've got tools and options. And then the very first tab has general and color theme. Now from there you can change between dark and blue and all that different stuff. I generally prefer to use the dark theme. Okay, it shows up a lot better, especially a bit later when we do things like comments and trying to identify the variables. Okay, it also gives you a nice contrast between what is actually going to be developed as your main project and what's not. Okay, so this is the example of the previous project. I'm actually going to close this project right now. So I'm going to go close file, close solution. Okay, I don't want to save it because I don't really need that project right now. And I'm going to click on a new project. So create a new project. It's going to be another Windows Forms app, okay, in C Sharp. So I'll click next. This one's going to be Hello World. All right, and I'll go ahead and press create right now. So we're going to start off by creating a number of interface elements. So rather than this big form that we're going to start with, I'm going to create a slightly smaller form and I'm going to drag on a few elements. So if you don't have these tools on the side, I did show you in the last lesson, but essentially you probably got the button over here that says toolbox. Okay, and then I like to organize it by having all Windows forms. Then it just shows us everything we need alphabetically, okay, rather than having to remember what type of category a certain object is. Okay, so the first one we're going to do is we're going to drag on a text box. Okay, so if I scroll down and I simply click on text box and drag it onto my form, you'll see I've got this big, this little text box right here. If I click on this little arrow just in the above it, I can then select multi-line or multi-line. Okay, and that will allow me to drag and customize the size of that text box. Okay, now at this time it's really important to remember to not double click on any of your objects. Okay, because if you do that now, it's going to instantly create the background code for it. So I don't want to do that just yet. What you have to do first, before you double click and before you enter the code for any of your objects, is give it a proper name. So I'm going to first make sure that I've got my form identified, and I'm going to do that simply by clicking on the form. I'm going to scroll all the way down to my properties on the far right. I might just make that window a little bit bigger. Okay, and I'm going to scroll right to the top. Now you can probably see mine says name. Now even though name starts with N, they list it right up the top, even in the alphabetical order, because it's the most important property ID we have. Okay, so the thing that I'm going to name this form is simply going to be form hello world. But when we write code, we want to have a prefix that identifies not only the type of object we're using, but also a good name for it as well. So instead of just calling it the hello world form, we actually want to call it the FRM hello world. Now, FRM is the general syntax we use to indicate a form. Okay, so this one is called FRM hello world. Okay, now you'll notice that when I did that, nothing else actually changed on the form itself. To change the heading up the top of the form, you actually have to scroll all the way down to where it says text. So I'm going to rename it. So down here, instead of saying form 1 there, I'm going to say hello world. Oops. Hello world, and now you'll see it's got hello space world listed up the top just here. If I scroll right back to the top, just want to give you my name again, just in case you can't see it. It says FRM hello world, and I have it set with the H and the W capitalized. Now that's the common code convention that I want everyone to be using. It's commonly referred to as camel code because we have lowercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, 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 uppercase, lowercase, and so forth. Okay, now it's a really common convention we use. Okay, I'll put up the names of the objects a little bit later so that you can get those covered. Okay, so what you've got now is you've got one form called FRM Hello World and you've got a text box. let's just go ahead and name that text box now. Make sure under text it's actually left blank. If I type something into that little field there, you'll see it appears in the text box itself. Well, I don't want that to be the case. I want that text box to remain empty. To rename the text box, you'll have to scroll right to the top and give it a name under the name field. Okay, and the name that we want to give it is TXT display with a capital D, representing the data that's going to eventually come into this document. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to create a series of buttons. Okay, so I'm going to have 5 buttons, and to do that, you're going to go right back over to your toolbox again. You're going to click on a button, and you're going to drag it and put it onto your screen. Now, you can change some of the effects of these buttons. You can give them different names. You can give them background colors, anything you want, really. For now, what I really want is to have everyone has the same 5 buttons. Okay, and you can do that by simply pressing Control C and Control V to copy and paste them. However, before that, I'm just going to change one tiny little thing. I'm going to give it a name. So instead of button 1, I want this one to say button a BTN display, again with the capital D. But notice now I've got BTN display and TXT display. So that's an example now of where giving the prefix to the object is really important, because if I said change the property of display and I didn't give it the name BTN display or TXT display first, it's not going to know if I was talking about the text box or the button. Okay, but because I've called this one TXT display and this one BTN display, the computer is going to know how to distinguish between the two objects, even though in a sense they kind of have the same name. Okay, I'm going to scroll up now. I'm going to choose back color. Whoops. Recording again. Good. Yep, we'll just keep that there for now. All right. So display, I'm going to press Control C and I'm going to paste that. So Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Notice after I've pasted them, I can put them straight underneath each other and it will actually snap lock to those specific locations, so it organizes it nicely for us. Okay, I'm going to paste another one now, so I've got a third underneath. Okay, I'm also going to paste a 4th and a 5th. Okay, so instead of display on all 5 buttons, we obviously want to give these different names and different titles. Okay, so this second one that I've got situated right here, this one's going to be called BTN switch, and I'm going to give the name text. Oops, where is it there? Text. Instead of display, I want that to say switch. Okay, on my third form, I'm going to give this text button the display. Sorry, I'm going to give the text as flashy, and I'm going to give it the name BTN flashy. Oops. Make sure you keep these capital letters in the right location so that we've got them organized clearly. All right, the next one, BTN clear for clear, and it's going to have the text that reads clear. Then you want to have the final one as exit. Oops, and BTN exit. All right, so we've got display, switch, flashy, clear, and exit. I'm going to add a final object right now, and that's going to be a checkbox. I'm going to click on checkbox, and I'm going to drag it down here. Instead of checkbox 1, okay, what we want to have in the text field is the word enabled. Okay, so we've got enabled there, and it's going to be given the name, oops, CHK enable, okay, with the capital E. All right, so make sure you've got your form there. That's how it's going to be set up. That's how we're going to be interacting with our form. That's what it's going to look like. You can test that form when you've actually finished creating all of the objects. All you simply have to do is click on play and it will start to load up that form as though it's actually ready to be used by the user. And you can see it's here. I can even stretch it out if I need to, but it's actually the form that I've done. Now these buttons aren't actually going to do anything yet. This is what's going to happen when we add in the code. Okay, but that's what our final project is going to look like when it actually is finished in this Hello World program. Okay, just pause. Okay, so now that you've got your form created, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start adding some functionality to these buttons. So the first one I'm going to do is going to focus on the clear button. So if I double click on that button, you'll see that it starts to load up with a whole bunch of code just here already set up for us. So what's happened is that it's starting to create a private function that requires no additional data in order to work. Okay, it has the default setting that it will load when the button is clicked, okay, by a specific sender. Okay, now if I just scroll back up and I'll just show you some of these other things as well. These things up here are referred to as libraries. So they automatically load in a whole bunch of predefined codes ready for us to use as needed. And we're going to actually add in a whole bunch of other libraries throughout various different projects. Then the most important thing we have then, I'm just going to minimize that, is that it starts the actual code for our world, our project. Okay, now that's what we call a namespace or a class where we've got hello world. Okay, this is a class where it has the ID of a program. Okay, and within that, then we have additional sub areas where we can add on additional modules. Okay, so the first thing we want to do though is I just want to give you some bit of details about some of these extra lines. Okay, so the first thing that happens is it's got a public partial class. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, I'm going to put in a couple of carriage returns so that I can put in a comment. So to put in comments is just simply a double slash. And this is what that line means. It actually means it inherits the libraries, okay, of objects and methods. Oh, great spelling of objects just there. Objects and methods for the form class. Okay, so what does it mean? What does it mean by for the form class? Well, the class is like an ID. Okay, it's created an idea of what a form looks like. And this line here, this is saying, okay, we need to get a copy of form and we need to access its objects and its methods. Now, its objects can be things like buttons, text boxes, and so forth. Methods are how we use that. So for a button, we would click on it. Okay, so that's how later on, when we get to this clear, it knows what underscore click actually means because it's inherited all of its objects and methods from the form class, not like from the instructions. Okay, the next thing we've got to do is once it's created the idea or it's inherited the idea of the class, we've got to create an instance of it. Okay, so we've actually got to go, well, we know what a class is now. Let's create one. Okay, and we're going to do that form called the FRM Hello World, and that's going to be my form class. Okay, so let's go declare an instance of the form class. So declare an instance of it. Tell me that you need one of them to be used right now. Okay. All right. And then the next line that you can see, it's got initialize component. Basically, that's just a really fancy way of saying load. Okay, so basically we've got load the libraries. Okay, and class objects. Oops. For the form. So we've created the idea of what the class is. We've created an actual instance of it, and now we've loaded it. Okay, so that's what that stuff up the top means. Now try never to change any of that, okay? Once you start messing around with it, the other thing I've done is added a few comments. Now the comments don't execute. They're just words in there to help us remember what they do. Okay, but what we want now is we're going to add in some code to our clear button. Okay, so this is where we're going to write the code for when, whoops, not clear, for when the clear button is clicked. Okay, still spelled it wrong. So when the clear button is clicked, this is what's going to happen. Okay, and you can see that when I specifically click my mouse, I'm actually being very selective about where I'm putting it. I'm not putting it there, I'm not putting it there, there, or there, or there. See these parentheses, braces, brackets? This thing here means open up this line of code, and this one here means close that line of code. Now, the really cool thing is that it automatically defaults to a really cool tabbed or indented line so that we can actually start doing stuff. Okay, so when I hit clear, what do I actually want to do? Well, hopefully you can see at the top that you can tab between the two windows. You can go between your code and your actual form design. So what I've got here is I've got my text box, and I want it so that when I hit the clear button, anything in that text box vanishes or deletes. So I actually want to make that text box empty again. Now, one of the easiest ways to make something go empty is to redefine it to have nothing. Okay, so this is what my instruction is going to say. So I want it to actually say clear the text box. But how do I write that as a code? Well, I first need to do two things. I need to point to the object that I want to make something happen to. So that's going to be the txt display. Okay, and as you start typing code, you'll see that things start to pop up and it asks you for autofills and so forth. Okay, if it gets it right, you just push tab and it'll go across. Okay, so the first thing I've done is I've pointed to the object that I want to change. The next thing I do is I need to point to the actual property of the object that I want to change. So in this situation, when I want to change what's in the text box, I want to change the text itself. Okay, so I want to change the actual text field. Now I could change things like, the color and the form background and the size and all this different kind of stuff. Okay, this is how you can change any sort of concept about a different object on your screen. Okay, as I said though, in this situation, all I want to do is change the text property. Okay, and I simply want to do it by changing it so that there is absolutely nothing in there. Okay, so it's got txt display.text equals blank. Now that blank is actually just the quotation marks inside it. So if I click on play now, okay, so if I click on play now, what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to load up my form. It won't have anything on it already, okay, but I want to be able to test my clear button. Okay, so if I can type some rubbish into there, it doesn't matter and all that kind of stuff. But if I push clear, it has overridden everything that was in my text box. It doesn't matter how many times or how much data I put in there, okay, it's still going to work every single time I push clear. Okay, that's because it's redefining the property to be equal to blank, okay, or equal to nothing. All right, let's go back to our form design then, because now that we've coded this button, I want to code this one as well. This is actually another pretty easy button to code. Essentially what happens is when you press on this exit button, you want the program to finish. Okay, so I'm going to double click on my exit button. You'll see it automatically creates this private void function for me again, but this time it's pointing to the btn exit category. Okay, and I simply want it to do it so it closes the program. Okay, and my code that I need for that is assuming I can spell it right, application.exit, open close brackets. Okay, and you can see there's got application.exit. Notice the two semicolons that appear at the end of those lines of code. It's really important to do that. It will throw up an error if you get those in the wrong order. Okay, I've still got my text working. I can still push clear on that. However, now when I push exit, it automatically stops my program and I've got another way of finishing my compiler. Okay. Okay, guys, let's keep going. This is the next part. We're going to now focus on our display button. Okay, so what we want to happen this time is when I click display, I want the hello world to appear in my text box. Okay, so that's the whole point of the main hello world concept every time we do coding. So hopefully you guessed by now, to start the code, you double click on the button, you'll get the beginning of your code, this time pointing to btn display. And I'm going to put in the first line of comments. Okay, so you know what the purpose of these buttons are going to do this time. So the first line of code that needs to happen is it's going to display hello world in the text box. Okay, after that, the next line is going to place the cursor in the text box. Now that's going to be so we can just keep typing into it after that. And the final line of code is going to place the cursor at the end of the text. So basically at the end of the hello world, so after the D. Okay, so there's three things that the display button is going to do. Now it's going to happen really quickly, even though we've got three individual lines of code that are going to happen. Okay, so when we're referring to an object, Okay, and the object's property, we need to do it by the object name dot property. Okay, so the object once again is txt display. We're referring to the text property. Now, we could just do something like this. We could just say hello world. Okay, and that would actually work, and that would say hello world into my field. Okay, the other thing is though, if there was something in there already, I actually want the hello world to appear after that. So if I put hello world, okay, and then I click the display button again, I actually want it to say hello world, hello world. Okay, if I hit it again, I want it to say it 3 times. Okay, so the best way to do that is to actually add the hello world to what's already in the text box. And the easiest way to do that is to go txt_display.text equals txt_display.text plus hello world. So basically it says whatever's in the property in that text field, add hello world to it. Don't just replace it entirely. Okay, so after that, we've got place the cursor into the text box. Well, that's a pretty easy code. That's a default one for us. And we're simply going to go txt display.focus. Now, that's a method that allows the cursor to be instantly transported straight back into the text box. After that, we want to do txt display because we're still talking about that. But to make it so that we know where our cursor is actually going to be, we need to refer to the selection start property. Okay, and that's going to be exactly at the end of the text that's in there. Okay, so that selection.length, that's a method that's going to find however much text is in there, whether there's 5 characters or 500. It's going to say, well, if there's 500 characters in there, I'm going to say start playing, start typing, put my cursor at the 500th position. Okay, that's where I want it to happen. Okay, so what I can see now is when I push on play, hopefully it will load up fast this time for us. It's loaded up half a dozen times already. Okay, you can see my world here. Okay, I can put in hello like that, but as soon as I push display, it adds the phrase hello world. Now I can just keep doing that over and over and over again. My clear should still work. Okay, but if I just add words in between them as well, it's automatically determining what words are in there, and it's adding the hello world straight after it as well. Okay, I'm going to hit on exit now, and we're going to start looking at our next piece of code. Now, the next piece of code is quite more complicated than some of the other ones that we've got. Okay, so I'm going to focus now on my flashy code. Okay, so what we want to do now is we actually want to make it so that we can coordinate our the background of our code to switch between 2 different color schemes. Okay, now if I'm back on my form, you'll actually see that I can change the background color of these various different things. So if I go background or back color, I beg your pardon, I can choose this option here and I can make it, let's say, blue. And now I've got a blue background for my form. Okay, but what I want to actually do, I'm going to start on the switch actually, sorry, not the flashy. Okay, we're going to start on the switch, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to switch between a blue and a red background. And we're going to do this through the use of 2 if conditional statements. Okay, so first thing you need to do, double click on your switch, and you should get the default setting to start your code. Okay, I'm going to give myself some space this time. Now, hopefully you got in a situation where you're ready and you're sort of understanding the idea of an if condition. So basically what we want to do is we want to check that if the checkbox is enabled, we're allowed to change it between blue and red. If it's not enabled, then it's going to show up a message and say you haven't checked it. Okay, now what checkbox we're talking about? This one here. So basically what I want to do is I want to click on that enable button of that enabled checkbox and then click on switch. Now it should change me to a different color. If it doesn't work, it's going to be able to, it's going to show me an error rather. Okay, so here's how we're going to do. Here's my actual simple description of it. If the background is red, change it to blue. If the background is blue, change it to red. Okay, pretty straightforward right now. Well, let's type out the actual code to do that. So what we've got, oops, I'm going to go back up and I'm going to check my checkbox first. That'll be a better start. So if the checkbox is enabled, okay. Actually, I won't use the word enabled this time. I'm going to focus on selected. So the user has to select the box. Okay, so what we've got is if. You open up the if command and then you open up the brackets to represent the condition that has to appear in there. So I've got chk enable. Now you might have guessed that we're referring to this particular object. The actual property that you want to do is the phrase checked. So if the checkbox enabled is equal to true, then we can do this program. Okay, and I'm going to put that little condition in there so you can see it. And I'm just, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to scroll that far. Grab these 2 lines of code. I'm going to put them in there now. Okay. If the checkbox is enabled, then it's going to be saying true. Now, a lot of students forget to use the double equal sign at this point. Remember, if I had left it as check.enabled equals true, just like that, what that phrase or what that statement actually does is redefine it so that checkbox becomes true. It doesn't actually ask it a question, is it true? And it's a really important distinction between that people get a lot wrong quite often. Okay, so let's start our first condition now. Nice and easy thing to talk about when we've got the form. You can write FRM, display or FRM hello world or anything like that. But C# uses this really cool feature where they actually just say this. Okay, now that means referring to the form that we're talking about. Okay, so if we're talking about the back color, oops, we're talking about the back color, we want to check to see if it's red. Okay, and obviously in American software, we need to assume that it's going to be in American spelling. Okay, so let's open up that. Now, if this dot back color is equal to, whoops, again, 2 equal signs, very important error. If it's red, you want to change it so that it becomes, whoops, blue. Okay, now notice the difference, the double equal sign there and the single equal sign there. Okay, however, if it's not red, then it must be blue, okay, or it must be the other side. So what we want to do is we want to say, well, if it's not going to be red, then we need to put in a piece of code that changes it now to the red. This dot back color is equal to color dot red. Oh, I spelled it with the our spelling as well, didn't I? Sometimes it can be very difficult to get that spelling match up correct. Okay, so this dot back color equals color dot red. Now sometimes it will automatically correct your spelling, will automatically correct your uppercase, lowercase, and so forth. Okay, but sometimes it won't, so just be aware of that. All right, after it's now changed it between red and blue as needed, we also need to give us a message that says if the checkbox wasn't checked, we're actually going to have to throw up that error and tell the user that the box wasn't checked. Okay, so be careful in where you've got your brackets. Notice I've got these lined up quite nicely. If it's red, then change to blue, else change it to red, but only if the checkbox was true. If it wasn't, this is the code we need to put in now. Okay, so else message box dot show the checkbox is not checked. Exclamation point. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Message box.show. There are other features you can do. You can have additional commas and stuff that give you additional options, like what type of message box you want to see. Today, all we're doing is focusing on the fact that we have a message box appearing, but you can add things like have the exclamation points or the stop button or the OK and cancel or yes and no fields and all that different kind of stuff. Okay, so you can see my form is loaded up this time. It's still got my text. I can still do display and clear. If I click on switch without that checkbox enabled, it has now given me this error. This checkbox is not checked. Okay, it doesn't matter how many times I do it, it's still just going to give me that error. If, however, I check my checkbox now and I click on switch, it allows me to switch between these two various form colors. Okay, So as soon as I uncheck it, it gives me back on the error again. Even if I've left it on red, it still should work fine. Okay. Okay, so now that we've got that one working, I'm just going to exit out of my loading application and we're going to do our very final button in this program, which is our flashy button. So you probably guessed that I'm trying to show you a whole bunch of different simple concepts right now from the start, things like if conditions, things like accessing properties and being able to access a property from a different object and all that kind of stuff. The last one we're going to do is we're going to introduce a Boolean variable, and we're going to use a couple of different loops in order to change the property of the form. So we've just done the property of the form color, where we've got it going from red to blue. Well, this flashy button is going to do a similar concept, okay, where it's actually going to start to create a nice smooth transition between two different colors and back again. Okay, and it's going to do that by using some red, green, and blue arguments. Okay, so now that I'm in my BTN flashy object, I'm going to start off by creating a Boolean variable. Okay, so the very first time you created a variable, you define the data type, in this case Boolean, and I'm going to give my Boolean variable a name. I'm just going to call it rainbow, and I'm going to set it to be defaulted at true. Not with that, not like that. All right, Boolean rainbow equals true. Now, what have I just done? Well, I'm going to explain it. I'm going to put it back in the comment again. Boolean variable to turn the rainbow flash feature on or off. Okay, so Boolean variable to turn the rainbow flash feature on or off. Now you probably noticed that there's actually an error being thrown up, that green underline there. It's actually not an error right now. It's basically just saying I've got this variable that you created, but I haven't used it yet. Okay, do you need it or not? Now every time you create a variable the first time, you're obviously going to see that error. Okay, but as long as you're going to use it, nothing to worry about at all. All right, so let's create a while loop. And basically this is going to happen while rainbow is true. So basically while we've decided we want it to work. Okay, and in this situation, we're going to use a while loop. Okay, now you can say while rainbow is equal to true. Okay, but a far easier thing to do when you're using a Boolean variable is to actually just write it by putting the variable in. Okay, now that's defaulted by saying, assuming it's true. Okay, you can't, if you need to put false, you'll need to write is equal to false like that. But if you're actually just checking that condition is true, it's really cool because it just assumes that if, as long as you put the Boolean variable in there, it thinks that you want it to be true. Okay, let's start our code. So start an integer at 0 and count 1 at a time to 255. Now, some of you might be wondering why 255? Like, why not 250 or why not 1,000? Okay, this is actually based on the 8 bits that we can store in terms of color schemes. Okay, 2 to the power of 8 uses 256, but if you start at 0, it goes up to 255. Okay, and they're the color schemes that we use to create all the colors on the internet. Okay, 256 different shades of red, 256 different shades of blue, and 256 different shades of green, all of them basically blending together to create all of the colors that we actually need. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to start an integer at 0 and count 1 at a time to 255. Best way to do that is to use a for loop. Okay, so we've got for, and we're going to go int c equals 0. You could have chosen I or E or anything, doesn't matter what letter you chose, as long as you kept the same thing. And as long as we've counted all the way up to 254 and it's visible, and then we're going to add 1 at a time. All right, so you see my for loop there now. Oops, spelled visible wrong. Okay, remember when we've got visibility as put into a property, visible only has either enabled or not, or visible or invisible. And just like what we've got up here, the default setting would be that visible is true. Okay, so if every time we run this loop, we want to change the back color. And I do try to use the correct spelling from the system, even though it's wrong from us or from our perspective. Oh, look, I just did it again. Color scale, and then we're going to pause. So change the back color. So every time we loop through this, okay, or 255 times we loop through this, it's going to change the back color just a tiny bit each time. All right, so we've got this dot back color equals color dot from arguments of red, green, blue, and I want it to be C, 255 minus C, and C. Okay, I'm going to make it so that, oops, that's not what we're having. Application dot do the event, so it tells it to do it. And finally, system dot threading dot thread dot sleep. Now that basically just says, oh, forgot the three. That basically just says wait for 3/1000ths of a second or 3 milliseconds. Okay, now this part here, C 255 minus C, C. Now what does that mean? Well, basically every time you're in the RGB, that's what those things mean, R there, the G is the second comma, and the B is the last one. It's saying put a value into R, put a value into G, and put a value into B. Now the first time it's got through that loop, C would be equal to 0. So the first time the value would be 0. The second time, and the second value, so the green, it would be 255 minus 0. So the second value would be 255, and the B would be equal to 0. So essentially what I'd have there would be 0, 255, 0. So if I've got no shades of red, no shades of blue, and all of green, or like 100% of green, okay, my background is just simply going to be green. Okay, but what I want to happen is I want those things to move into the reverse order. So by the time I get to the very end, I want that to be 255, this to be 0, and that to be 255. So I've got all of the red on and all of the blue. Okay, so what I end up there was a kind of magenta or purple shade. Now you can modify these as many different ways as you want. For example, if I put in 255 minus that as well, it's going to start with full green and full blue, which will actually start the form being yellow. Okay, and then by the end of it, it'll turn the form red because we have red there as the only one, and these two will end up back at 0. Okay, but I'm going to make it go from green to purple. But like I said, you can change your color schemes however you want. Okay, so I've got 0, 255, and 0. Then it puts that into the RGB, and it says wait for 3 milliseconds. Now, if we didn't put that wait in, it would actually just happen so fast. The computers are actually so fast that it would execute just between our eyes, and we wouldn't see anything happen at all. Okay, so now that we've got all the way from green to purple, okay, what I actually want to happen now is go from that point all the way back to green again. So what we've got to do is we've got to create another loop that basically goes in the backwards direction. So rather than rewrite it out, I'm going to copy all of that code, and I'm just going to do some slight modifications to it. So you see now I've got basically two different versions of this code. Okay, but I'm going to do a slight change. Instead of starting at 0, we want to start at the end of the code this time, so right up to 254. Instead of being less than 254, we need to check that it's going to be greater than 0, or as long as it's greater than 0. And since we're counting backwards or counting down, we need to do C minus minus. Okay, so my code now says start an integer. No, don't want to do that. It needs to be change that color, okay, in the reverse order to the previous loop. Okay, so this one has C, 255 minus C and C. That's still going to work the same. It's going to have the sleep as well, so we can keep doing that. And then we're good. Finally, once it's gone all the way from green all the way up to purple and then all the way back down to green, we actually want it to stop. Okay, we don't want that to happen anymore. So at the end of this loop, we have to actually tell the rainbow to stop executing. So rainbow equals false. Okay, so it stops making that code over and over again. Okay, so hopefully now we've got that working. If I click on play, we should be able to see that my flashy button is going to automatically default it to be one color, then slowly transition to a different color, and then return it back to the original one again. So I'll click on flash, you can see it changed to green. It's slowly transitioning now. You can see it's going from green all the way to that pinky magenta color, okay, where it had the 0 and the 255 in the right order. It went through that loop and now it's back to the beginning again. You'll notice it's also stopped. Okay, however, if I click on exit and I just take that code out, okay, an easy way to take something out without deleting it is just to make a comment, okay. What you'd probably find is that it would go green, purple, green, purple, green, purple, green, purple, over and over and over again, but it would actually be stuck in a loop. It would never be able to exit that loop. Okay, so what I've done here is I've got a Boolean variable that tells us to turn on, okay, and move all the way through. But you could also then change it so that it turns off at our specific desire. So you could put in a piece of code that says do it 5 times, or do it 10 times, then stop. Okay. So guys, that's all of the concepts covered in the Hello World. So just as a quick recap, you can see now when I click on play, I've got my little program loaded up, okay, and it will automatically add things like I can type straight into my screen, hello my screen. I can click on display. It's going to keep adding hello world to it. If I press clear, it will get rid of that code. I can still type into it, keep pressing display. If I click on switch without the enabled, it turns the checkbox warning on. Turn the checkbox warning on. Now I can switch between red and blue. If I click on flashy, it'll then do my green to purple shift for me. I can even start executing the other one just as soon as that first one is finished. Okay, so oops. But the previous code is still going to keep happening. Okay, even if it's getting interrupted by the previous one. Okay, so I'll just switch again and I'll press stop. Okay, so make sure you get all of that code working. Okay, the code is available for you to look at later on. But as you can see, there is a lot of it there. Please make sure that you are being very tidy with your code. You're following your indentations. Okay, you're also including comments all the way through so that you don't forget what the different things actually mean. Okay, and that you're saving along the way.